Hi and welcome to the Venture Builder podcast, where you can hear interviews with entrepreneurs, founders, investors, and other players in the entrepreneurial and startup ecosystem. In this episode, we continue our conversation with Charles, co-founder, team owner, and team manager of mobile esports team Kicks, as we talk about managing an international team in the post-COVID-19 era, as well as the key differences between traditional sports and esports. For the audience, so Kicks and Loot that Charles runs are two of our portfolio companies at WNJ Ventures. And by far, I think, especially with Kicks, the international element or the diversity of the team is by far the greatest out of all the companies in our portfolio. So it's really interesting to hear you talk more about how you first select the people, like the coach who manages that dynamic. And then secondly, I think what interests me with esports and traditional competitive sports is that the results are so tangible and so visible. You can put a lot of work in and then see the result of it. You get the validation pretty fast. So sometimes in business, I think it's not as clear cut. You have to wait maybe until the year end, and especially in the private space, it's not as easy to identify how you're doing compared to your competitors. There's a lot of smokes and mirrors. Like, you can brand yourself as a very, good business when maybe you're not so much. But with what I love about Kicks is like, and we watch it every weekend. Now we're going to the playoffs that, you're just there, or you see all your work within, say obviously in the past, but in that past week trying to make the strategic changes, and then how does it feel when kind of it works out, and how does it feel when it doesn't work out? It kind of I feel a little bit of it. Obviously I don't get half as involved as you and the coaching and everyone else in the team is, so so that's very interesting that you shared all the elements of the team dynamic. So and then you mentioned how would you manage it post-COVID, because again, your team is from, we have players from Egypt, France, Indonesia. Your team, kind of coaching team, is Hong Kong and Latin America or Spain? Yeah, Latin America. Yeah,
both actually. Is from
yes.
Venezuela and Spain. So you're
right. So I mean that in a sense, I guess traditionally it would have been hard anyway because of cultural and language differences. How has it worked out in this kind of post-COVID-19 world?
That's a very good question as well, because we had to adapt pretty fast, because as everybody, we didn't really see it coming. So we're gonna the thing is, so we have players from various countries, but luckily we have mainly two time zones, because our coach in Spain, we have a French player, Egyptian player, they're pretty much on the same time zone. And same in Asia. So we have players from Hong Kong, Japan, and Indonesia. So they are also pretty much on the same time zone. So that's okay. In terms of logistic, that's one thing that we had to overcome. That actually it's kind of makes it harder for us to train together. Because we kind of need to, as I said before, would start training around 10 a.m., but you can't really do that anymore. So we need to shift the day later on. So usually the first training altogether is going to be around 5 p.m. at Asia time, so morning Europe time. And the good thing, and I think that people have seen it all over the world and in business in general, is with tools like Zoom, you can easily manage your online meetings. So we actually use Zoom or other tools like Discord to communicate. So it's like communication is not a problem, because thanks to those tools, we can, people can, play online and discuss at the same time. That's fine. So I would say the logistic is okay. Just what is harder for us is we cannot train a full 6-8 hours a day together. So we had to shift a bit towards the day. I'm going to finish the touch later. But at the same time, I don't want the players to train until 2 a.m. So we kind of reduce a bit the time playing together, but we try to make it very effective. Then we have some more dedicated training, like individual training in different, for the different time zone. But I think the hardest part to overcome is not the training, is going to be the
in-game.
How do you manage and motivate players online? That is a much more difficult task.
I mean, especially because you're dealing with very young players as well. I mean, I think your team is probably from teens to early 20s, that sort of range.
That's correct.
So
yeah, and if you want to know the truth, we actually, for our youngest player, who's 16 years old, we luckily his mom she's very involved, and she's really she's very supportive.
Oh, wow.
Happy that us. Yeah, no, it's something that amazes me all the time, and I don't see coming. So the mom is gonna sometimes actually help us. If the kid is late or is not awake, she's gonna wake him up. If he sleeps late at night, she's gonna tell us. So we're super lucky to have the backup from them. I mean, I know it sounds a little funny, but that's very important.
The discipline is important.
Yeah, that's because it's just like a lot of things in life. You need to the players are good and they're ready. They're training hard every day. But what can make a difference is how you treat yourself. So if you always if you have like an unbalanced schedule and go to bed late before a match or something like that, that can really affect your performance on the day. So it's something that we cannot overlook. Something that is very important. And of course, that was much easier to handle when we were all together in a gaming house. But now that you have players all over the place, and we cannot really make sure that they do that. So we do our maximum, honestly, to always communicate with them. We have some, usually, as I say, we have some assets on the ground with them. Usually it's gonna be a mom or a friend or something that we can that can help to kind of manage them a little bit. So that's we have been we got a lot of help from people around them. So that is a great thing. But yeah, what the hardest part, honestly, is gonna be on the how you keep them really motivated, especially when they don't all speak very good English. So that's also sometimes a problem. So when you're together, it's easier to build a friendly relationship. Now and I'm very happy about it, but especially this season, we had some new players, because if you have players that met before, it's also a bit easier. But we had a lot of players that met online. They've never met together offline, and they're playing in a competition where you have like hundreds of thousands of dollars at stake, and their career and their fame and everything, and they've never met each other. So it's it is a challenge, but honestly, it's been working well. Thanks to good communication and help from people on the side. So we're pretty happy about it. And I think that's gaming and esports was kind of born online. I think that's something that is not too strange for our players.
Yes, and I think in a way the sector is a little bit ahead of the curve, just because of, as you mentioned, the digital nature of what you do, and also the highly competitive element and pushing you into the spotlight, and the fact that you're predominantly dealing with very, very young kind of Gen Zs, youths. And I know a lot of organizations and institutions ask me this question: how do you motivate the younger generation, and how do you work collectively and collaboratively online? And I think you guys are basically tackling those two problems straight on.
Exactly.
And I think that it's amazing sometimes when I watch the matches. I mean, even in game, I know you mentioned how difficult it was to communicate before, but like other teams may be in the same room or obviously in the stadium, but being remote, and you're basically playing 2-on-2 with this guy when you have to communicate instantly. I think it's pretty amazing what you guys have done from that aspect, and that kind of extends to something I want to conclude with, in the sense that, you know, a lot of people still don't understand esports. Obviously, more and more people do now. For me, when I'm explaining it to people who are less familiar with it, I see a lot of comparison to traditional sports with a kind of tech digital nature. That we touched on a few things of how, you know, for example, each game is almost like a sport because, you know, they have different metas, they have different dynamics. It could be 5-on-5, it could be 1-on-1. So that's, I think, is the first element. And then secondly, I think that the pace of change and being able for the players to cope with just the constant changes in the game. It's something slightly different to say if you're playing a traditional sport and, you know, the rules of soccer or football or basketball has been more or less the same. Obviously, there are changes, but how do you see the comparison between, say, a traditional a sports player and a competitive esports player? I know you touched on the fact that having a coach that had sport coaching experience really helped. So obviously there are some similarities and some differences there. So can you take us through a little bit of your views on that?
All right, yeah, sure. I'm definitely not an expert in traditional sport, but it's a very good question, and something, you know, we've always tried to, especially when you talk to managing, developing, scouting talents. We have a lot to learn from traditional sports, so it's something that I've taken a look at. But you said a few interesting things during your question, and one of it, I think, one element to keep in mind, and I'll try to develop that, is the fast pace. Everything moves much faster in esports. How the game evolves compared to the sport, how the length of the career of the player, and when they start. Actually, I was reflecting on that the other day, and I realized one of the main difference actually is, let's say, take football for example. Usually, you don't become a pro player of football in 1 year or 2 years. 2 years. You start maybe, let's say, around 8-10 years old, sometimes even earlier. You go through, you know, you join a club, then you might play in a regional league, in a national league, or, you know, in a high school league, in a university league, and then you go to pro. So usually that you're gonna go through like 10 years, more than 10 years of playing that sport and competing and being managed yourself as a player by coaches, being in a team. So although you're still very young when you become pro, and you still need a lot of structure, how the talents are nurtured is very, very gradual, step by step. In esports, sometimes you're gonna have a new game popping up, and within the span of 1 or 2 years, you're gonna have pro players, and that are gonna be 16 years old. So this is very brutal. And sometimes then they're gonna become professional players, and they're gonna play for competitions with millions of dollars. I exaggerate a little bit, but not that much. We've seen it with Fortnite, for example. And that's, I think that's a big difference. So when we hire, for example, at Kicks, a player that is 16 years old, is joining the structure, is gonna get a salary, he's playing in a competition with money at stake, is being managed by people, is playing with teammates. A few months ago, he was still playing in his room alone. It's a massive difference. It's as I said, it's a bit brutal. And there's obviously different ways to tackle that, but I think what I try to do, and I think it's true for all the fast environment, and that I kind of relate to my experience building our startup, the Loot Esports platform, is I try to surround myself with actually self-motivated people. And that's one of the key for me, because when, you know, even if we have that young talent that is 16 years old, and of course he's going to be young, he's not necessarily going to behave as somebody with much more experience, but he is a talented player, that wants to be the best at what he does, and you don't need to push him, to train, or you don't need to drag him to the training and do this, do that. Of course, we're going to help him to become better and fine tune some details, but at its core, the guy just wants to be the best. And that helps a lot. Because I had a few bad experiences where you have some players less motivated and that, they don't have that hunger for competition. And I usually don't work very well anyway, because it is a competition. If you don't really want it, it's not going to work. So that is, that's the same for coaches and players, especially, as the environment's changing all the time. You need people with adaptability and self-motivation. That's one of the key. So that's the, I think what's going to be interesting is now we can see games like League of Legends that I think it's like 10 years old. So you could see a structure that could become closer to a traditional sport. I don't speak in terms of league because it's already the case, but in terms of talent scouting and career paths. Now I think we could see, and it already exists, although it's still the early stage, players starting to compete in high school, maybe a bit like getting a scholarship in university, and then become a pro. The main difference is that in sports, usually you're going to be at the prime of your game and your strengths and your physical abilities around 18, 20 years old. Then you're going to decrease a bit, but your experience is going to let you maybe be better. It's going to be an advantage compared to young players. But in esports in general, you're going to be better around 16, 18. So you don't have, I think in a way, you will never really have the same path. It's always going to be much faster. That's one of my feelings. So with more stable game, I think still we will see, we'll try to replicate some of the sports, career paths, but you will always have new games coming up, and then a new esports scene building and new pro players emerging very quickly. So as an esports structure, you're going to need to be able to be very fast at how you adapt yourself, how you scout talent, and how you nurture those talents once you hire them.
Right. So what I found really almost like motivational there was when you start describing how the players are kind of self-driven, and then there's just the hunger and desire to win, or the hatred of losing. I think that's what I think to the start of the section about how, like, what makes them different. I think you've kind of hit it on a nail there. It's it's a hard quality to find within just any group of people, let alone, these are very, as you mentioned, very young kids. So I think that's amazing. And the second thing is, what I learned there was, I think the longevity of each game and the sports will be different to traditional sports. So that's why I think some of the narratives around what makes traditional sports so endearing is that, obviously at age, maybe 20 to 35, some sports even 40, you have someone who you've been rooting for 5, 10, 15 years. Whereas at least in the esports space now, I think with less of that, maybe if people feel that, I know developers now are developing games with esports in mind as a primary factor. So who knows whether there will be games maybe that are more strategic in nature, or just the dynamic of it makes sure that maybe all the players can keep playing. Because I do feel like in esports, the fact that your life as a player is only, very, very short span of time does create some issues. For example, if you mentioned that the mother who's supportive, but how many are like, I'm supportive, but you're only going to have a 3-4 year career. Is that really a good, that makes it less viable, I think, in some regards. So hopefully we will see different forms. I mean, I'm sure there's still going to be very, very competitive games where, reaction speed and just got to be young. But hopefully there will be a more expansive set of games that cater for different types of players of different ages. I think that would be very exciting. But I think we've taken up enough of your time, but very, very happy to hear this from you. And we speak on an extensive basis, but I definitely learned a few new things from this conversation as well. So thank you very much for your sharing.
Thank you very much, Pling, once again for receiving me, and it's always a pleasure to chat with you, and anytime.